in-building communication systems within the public safety environment. You'll have to forgive me, I've lost my voice, so I'm going to have to depend on my good looks. I don't normally have to, or one or the other. So if I can't get through this today, Pablo has agreed to help me out. This morning we have a panel of three AHJs, as well as 2 integrators and 8 OEM, and we're essentially going to be talking about public safety in building communication and hopefully answering your questions. The intent of these slides here that I'm going to be presenting, and I'm going to keep this very short, is to start to get you folks thinking about discussion topics and questions that you need to have answered. It's the hope of everybody on this panel that there will be an interactive communication. So the intent is to get you the information you need for doing in building systems. These, I will tell you, are some of the toughest AHJs as far as building the communication systems and testing them. The in-building public safety communication systems are being required and enforced in quite a few places across the United States. Understanding that the changing requirements are the responsibility of both the AHJs as well as the integrators. Do we have any AHJs in this room besides the guys on the panel? Okay, very good.
One, I'm the only one.
Well, there's another one in the back there. So we have a couple here. The reality is that the failure to recognize the changes in what's going on in the industry, it costs both building owners, AHJs, integrators, not only money, but COs, and then it has an adverse effect, also can have an adverse effect on the radio system itself. I'm going to do a brief overview of the history of in-building communication. We're also going to talk a little bit about the code, specifically where there's questions, where it's not something that's interpreted the same way across AHJs. NFPA 1221 and 510 are frameworks, and we're going to talk to some of the guys up here about what they can be used for, and then we also want to talk about what exactly is an in-building communication system. One of the first in-building systems that was built was in the SLAC linear accelerator at Stanford University. You can see the big long tunnel there. Stanford linear accelerator, the engineers developed a DAS to cover the main accelerator tunnel for 2 miles in length. It was used to support the fire department. It was actually tied to voting receivers, and they took the signal off the air to bring the downlink. The system was designed in the 1970s, so these were, been around for a while, and it worked, believe it or not. It was an interesting system. They used cable TV amplifiers and twin lead for some of you older folks that might know. Alameda County Jail, they were one of the first jails that actually deployed a distributed antenna system. I'm sure there's others out there. This was built in the 1990s to support their 450 meg radio system. This particular jail has a total underground city that they do things like laundry, and they also produce the food for the rest of the jails in Alameda County. So there's a whole city that operates under this jail that has coverage. We changed it out a while back. It's now operating on the Alameda County system, which is 800 megs, but originally it was a 400 meg system using TXRX PDAs, and it was built in the 1990s. The city of Burbank is the oldest known ordinance that we know of, or at least we've been able to find. It was written in 1991 by Dr. Henry Reqs, who was a consultant, primarily because of the movie studios and making sure that they had coverage inside of it. City of Folsom, early 2000, Orange County, 2000, and then in 2007, we saw requirements or ordinances appear in NFPA 72, and listed in the appendix of 72. Other DAS milestones, DAS or in-building coverage becomes now the ERRCS system, which kind of hurts me, but That's what they've been calling it around the 2016 timeframe forward. And at NFPA 1221, DAS requirements started appearing, or in-building requirements started appearing in there. I shouldn't say DAS because 1221 does not say that you have to use a distributed antenna system, although most people look at it that way. Areas of contention in the current code. And this, I'm speaking specifically to the national code because we have people that have actually done what they were supposed to as AHJs and written the proper technical documents. One of them is connection between riser and feeder shall be made in a 2-hour fire-rated enclosure, which is pretty straightforward, but therefore does that mean that the BDA or the active equipment also needs to be in a 2-hour rated enclosure? That's one of the, you see that different from place to place. But it also can take a $500,000 system to a $5 million system if the interpretation of that is one way or the other. Do AHJs have to approve all DAS systems? The part on that. Well, anyway, there is a part in NFPA 1222 that, or 1221 that says that any DAS system that could cause potential interference or anything that could cause potential interference has to be approved by the AHJ. Well, any DAS system can cause any interference to any DAS system. So some cities are saying that they have to permit, in fact, I believe Clark County is one of them, that you have to permit all of your your carrier DAS systems as well as your public safety DAS systems. So that's another one that goes round and around, and some cities vary differently on that. Alarm requirements are constantly changing. And you're going to hear all kinds of different stories about those, but NFPA 72 as well as, NFPA 1221 as well as IFC 510, they're almost every code cycle they're adding something or changing something on the alarms. Another area of contention is the AHJ's responsibility to the code. Section 9.6.14 technical criteria. This is supposed to be written by each AHJ for their specific system. NFPA 1221, excuse me, and IFC 510 cannot be enforced without this document because the document by itself doesn't have relevant information to build a system. One of the things that, and I don't see it ever mentioned in 510, well, 510's got it written in a line, 1221 it's not really written, is part 90.219, which is the FCC's rules regulating BDAs. And in fact, you'll hear some folks say that, well, they're kind of recommendations. I've heard that here. They're not recommendations, but it doesn't seem to be outlined. Nobody's picked it up in their code. I mean, they've got a great document, 3 or 4 pages long, with the FCC recommends maximum noise powers, all kinds of things, but nobody's picking those up in their document. That's one of my questions, is why that's not happening. But you've got a minimum requirement of your frequencies, location, and effective radiated power of each of your transmitter sites. You should also include, things like voting sites, if you've got them, maximum noise powers of the BDA, maybe maximum gain you're going to allow to run. There's a whole host of things that you need to get together with your radio division, or it needs to come out of your radio division, or real smart people that are in the alarm division to write this. Maximum propagation delays, a list of specifically approved system components, and other supporting technical documents. This has become a real issue because 90% of the time it's not on any website, and it's very difficult to find the right person. We know we can go to the fire marshal, but maybe you got to go to the radio shop. Every city is doing things a bit differently. So what is a DAS or an ERRCS system? A DAS or ERRCS system is an extension of the two-way radio system. You will read documents that show it as an extension of the alarm system in a building. The only thing it has to do with the alarm system is the piece of wire between it and the alarm. So classifying it as an alarm is somewhat a dangerous thing to do because it affects your radio system much more than it affects your alarm system. The most important part of this system is the RF design and performance. The original ordinances that were written back in the 2000s and earlier, focused on RF performance. Under current ordinances, the focus has shifted to things like alarming, survivability, electrical, etc. And while those are all important things, those are not first and foremost what this system is about. In fact, I had one integrator up in Oregon tell me that their AHJ was more concerned about building a race car with a cool dashboard rather than making sure the engine didn't pollute. When it started the engine, it didn't pollute everybody so nobody could use the radio system or that it even operated at all. So that's some of the things that are going on in the industry. Our performance has been relegated to a secondary to the current code, and don't even mention, in many cases, 9219, which is the rule that allows you to even put these in to begin with. Meaning these systems are supposed to be an extension of the radio network. If the RF performance is not acceptable, what is the benefit of the system? And then more importantly, if these systems are put in it properly and end up causing radio or interference to the RF network, then it really becomes a detriment. Just a quick picture. This is a system in Northern California that the AHJ forced this system to come in and add this fire wrap here to an existing system that was already put in place. This fire wrap was about $53,000 against a $30,000 system to cover a building that was 25,000 square foot. Now, needless to say, the building owner wasn't too happy. But I want to show you what happened here. Okay, this is the install. There's fiber coming in here to operate the amplifier. The coaxial cable coming out of the amplifier is not protected. The power cable is not protected. And the battery box down here is an EMA 4 box. So let's talk about the realities of this. If a fire occurred in this building, the bottom line is, the first thing that's probably going to fail is either going to be the power cord or the antenna cable. But more importantly, the active equipment is only rated for 140. So in the event that a fire did occur in here, the active equipment is probably going to fail, first of all, and the whole place will burn down, but this nice little tiny piece of fiber that's less the size of a pencil will survive. And, you know, it really defeats the purpose. And I understand that AHJs are trying to, follow the code, but sometimes we do things that don't make sense to follow the code. Just a couple other quick things. Hybrid combiner signal splitters. Typically, their operating temperature range is 150 degrees. You go to mil spec 165. Active equipment operates between 140 and 160. Flame rated cable currently today, I know they're doing some testing, will operate at 176 degrees. In the event of a fire, the service antennas will be the first thing to melt and go away. So when we talk about survivability, I think we need to really look at the big picture of what you're dealing with. This isn't a fire alarm system. For some reason, and I understand that it got brought in through NFPA 72. And 72, that there is a thought process that these are fire alarm systems. Okay, our panel today consists of industry experts that have probably most of them at least 20 years of experience. I'm on 39. I know I'm getting old, but a lot of them have a lot of experience. We have both AHJs as well as manufacturers and integrators here. I'm going to briefly introduce the panel, and then I'm going to give them an opportunity. I've left bios so that you can pass those around that are more extensive, but because of time restraints, we don't want to go too terribly long on that, so each one's going to have an opportunity. We have Pablo, alphabetical order, Pablo Boas, and he's a DAS solutions engineer at Redwood Electric Group, and Pablo's been probably doing this for about 20 years, along with me. I've worked with him quite a long time. Ed Connolly, who's the RF communications engineer, is sitting right next to him. He's with the city of Portland. Myself, and I will be moderating. I've been doing this for a long time. I've been putting my first DAS system in '92 and 20 years, or now 40 years in the radio business. I see that I have a friend of mine that showed up. I asked Ellen to come in and say a few words. Ellen Tillis is an FCC attorney, and I'd like him to discuss a couple of the topics that seem to be misunderstood, and maybe he can help us out on that.
Let me apologize. I appreciate you asking me to come over, but I'm actually doing a session across the hall. So I'm rudely walking out on another speaker. So I just wanted to take a minute, because what we talked about this morning was that later on you're going to be talking about an FCC rule section, okay? And how some people apparently, I don't have this experience, but apparently you do, where some folks have said, oh, the FCC rule section is just guidance the fire code governs. Okay, if that is your impression, then I'm looking forward to representing you later and making a whole bunch of money off of it. Okay? I call those kind of thoughts the Lawyers Full Employment Act. Okay? And I hate when people say, okay, at the end of sentences, yeah, I did it. So I gotta stop that. FCC rule sections are rules. If they are guidance, they're marked as guidance. The FCC's rules regarding these issues, while they may not be entirely clear, it is not optional. And I understand that sometimes with regard to in-building and interference rules, sometimes they're not the most well thought out rules there could ever be, but they are still rules and not to be ignored. So what you want to do is to get good interpretations of those rules that are most beneficial to you, your agency, whoever it is that you're working for, and then massage that together to be able to do what you want to do. But please don't ignore them. Was there something specific before I have to run back?
Well, yeah, I did have a specific one. 9219, do you have a copy of it? Where the FCC has noise requirements, interference noise requirements. So, and it says in general, this is what you should meet. And Pablo's got it right there. And I've been professing this for a while, and I get told that, well, that's a general guideline, and I'm not sure it's a general guideline or not. I look at it as, in general, this is the way it should be. Now, some things might be outside of that, but at least it should meet that.
So 219, I actually worked on this back when I was younger. I was doing work in the FCC's signal booster proceeding for BIRD and its prior incarnation. And this rule section deals with signal boosters. Now, the signal booster rules are terrible in a couple of areas, particularly the one where you are supposed to, depending on the type of booster you're using, register with the carrier. Because we all do that. We register our consumer boosters, right? Raise your hand if you've done that. Oh, gosh. Okay, so that's not really well thought out. But the really important rules, depending on, there's really several types of signal boosters that these rules deal with. Consumer signal boosters, industrial signal boosters, and Part 90 industrial signal boosters. And the rules differ for each, depending in Part 90, broadband, narrowband, you have to look at what applies to that specific type of booster, whether you need permission of those that you are seeking to retransmit the signal of. So for example, if you're seeking to bring in a public safety signal into a building, you can't just do that. You must have permission of that licensee. And on the consumer side, you're supposed to register with the carrier. As I said, not many do that. But drill down into these rules as to what applies to your specific type of setup. Again, broadband, narrowband, consumer, industrial, Part 90 industrial. You cannot, for now, use a consumer booster on what you might think of as the Nextel frequencies, the SMR frequencies that are at 800 in Part 90, nor your old NIPSPAC frequencies before rebanding that are now being used by Sprint. You can't use consumer boosters there yet. There will be a public notice from the FCC at some point enabling that to happen. I'm sure people are doing it anyway, but they're not permitted at this time. Does that tell you what you need to do?
Yeah, one other question. Sure. And then I'll let you get back to right here.
I'm sorry to speak loudly and quickly.
No, the in general.
Can I make one of that since primarily for public safety, Part 90 would apply to off-air computers being used for retail and public safety purposes.
Needing permission? Yes.
Correct.
Correct.
I was referring to, we have a general, 1, 2, 3, ERP noise.
Oh, the ERP and the interbody?
Yeah.
Okay, so what's your question?
My question is, it says in general you should meet those guidelines or those rules.
Oh.
Is that a rule or a guideline?
You can find situations, this has to do with the intermod products. You can find situations where the FCC will say, yeah, in your situation, your specific type of application, that shouldn't apply because, but that's going to be the exception, not the rule.
Okay.
And what you'd have to do, so the way I would interpret that, I would go back to the rulemaking proceeding, and that's available on the Commission's website. You go back to the rulemaking proceeding, you look at the report and order, and you see where the Commission talked about why it created these rule sections in that way. Sometimes they did it on their own, sometimes they did it because we, the industry, suggested they do it. And then that'll drill down as to what they meant by that. That is not something that I can recall off the top of my head.
Well, it is one because it's my stuff, so I kind of recall. But I don't know if it would be considered a suggestion or a rule, because to me,
I gotta look at the report and order.
Got it, okay.
Which I'd be happy to do, and then you can tell everybody.
Okay.
I mean, not today.
Right, got it.
You know.
Okay.
Greg, in general, if your state, county, or
We done with
city
me?
ordinance
I am, thank you.
differs
I
from
appreciate it.
FCC rules, get this
Thank you, Alan. I know it was heartfelt, thank you.
Sorry, you're waiting for me.
I got it. Okay. Anyway, let me go back, do the panel real quick. Myself, I'm the loudmouth here without a voice. Chris Godwin, Senior Wireless Technologist for our Solutions. Don Henry from Kuba, manufacturer. I'm also a solid manufacturer. Steve Ronick, was the Deputy CIO of City of Glendale, and he ran the ISIS system, or ICI system now.
Now it's ICI for obvious reasons.
Yeah, for obvious reasons. Which is the 470 meg trunk radio system that covers 70 cities in Los Angeles County. I have Matt Tice at the end. Matthew is from the Washington D.C. Office of Consolidated Communications. He's a great guy. Yeah, unified. He's a pretty unified guy, and he's got a lot of knowledge and has been through a lot of getting beat up on the RF side. And then Brian Rhodes, who's a division engineer manager for Red Rock Security and Cabling. So I guess I would prefer to open it up to the audience. I do have some questions that have been sent in. I have some that came from NFPA, I have some from other sources. But I would prefer if the folks that are here ask the questions of these people on specific issues that they feel are necessary or they have questions on. Go ahead.
Hi, Greg.
Hello.
So with regard to the FCC comments, if a landlord installs public safety gas that meets the ordinance requirement of the AHJ, in all respects, it's a permit, it's signed off, and that ordinance doesn't necessarily comply with the FCC, who's liable for the correction? So how's it enforced? Who's liable for the fix? And who's going to enforce it?
I think the short answer is the owner of the hardware that was installed.
The owner of the building.
So the owner of the building, whoever owns that piece of hardware that was installed, is ultimately responsible for it.
Even though the AHJ has signed off?
And I got told yesterday by FCC attorneys that it's the licensee. So this is one of those things where, you know, these are.
We'll find out once the first court case goes through.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
you don't want to be that court case. Right. And the discussion I was having yesterday was, if you've got a BDA, it's operating under the license with the permission of the licensee. So if a BDA is causing interference, technically, if it's the BDA that you've authorized for your system, technically you're causing interference to yourself. And it's up to the city to identify it, pull the plug on it. I'm a big believer in emergency power off switches for BDAs that are in fire control rooms. But as far as the equipment, it's, at least in California, it's the building owner. And if it causes interference, the AHJ has to figure out which one it is and take it off.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting discussion. It's very problematic because the integrator or the electrical contractor who's working for the landlord, if they're designing and installing the system based on the ordinances that are in front of them, how are they, that may not reference the FCC requirement, how are they to know what that requirement is and then have to come back later and modify or fix a system based on ordinance requirements that were, didn't include the FCC requirement, which did mean.
So in that case, following the federal law, like following the state law does not mean you don't have to pay attention or read the federal law. And that's kind of how I would interpret that one. The state has an ordinance that how this should work there, but it's superseded by the federal regulations in that case.
And again, this is within even the NFPA rules. The AHJ is supposed to deliver you a document that tells you exactly what they want to see. And then, of course, if it doesn't correspond with the FCC rules, then it's got to be sorted.
Can I answer that? Well, I was just going to say, I think the integrators and the designer are responsible certainly for following federal law, understanding and following the federal laws that apply to this certainly before they go ahead and install this equipment. And if it's there's a conflict between that and the AHJ, we certainly need to resolve that before proceeding with it.
Well, if you think about it as a radio system, because it is an extension of the radio system, who's responsible if the radio system or a component of it causes interference, even if it's assigned to and used by somebody else? It's the licensee. And then the licensee has recourse against whoever owns the system. But there are lots of different codes. Everybody thinks NFPA, IFC, state and local ordinances. The overriding authority is Title 47 of the Code of Federal Regulations. The second most important document is going to be your local jurisdiction, because everything else up to that point provides a guideline of some of it's law, some of it's a guideline, but it's a foundation. But you need to specify how you want the systems to be configured and operate commensurate with the law in your jurisdiction.
I was just going to add that obviously hiring a qualified integrator is the key to it. Now, how you get there is the bigger issue, problem, because most of the integrators are hired by GCs that are looking for the lowest bid, so on and so forth. But you have the fire code and NFPA side of things, but that doesn't speak to the industry standard good practices for the commission of EDA, so on and so forth. So it's really an education process that needs to take place.
As far as installation practices, if you know Motorola R56, that's a really good standard to use even for EDA installation.
Well, I just want to add a comment to that. As a scary scenario, my AHJ in our municipality adopted the fire code verbatim. 510 verbatim into the city municipality.
I'm so sorry.
And they're interpreting it verbatim, or at least to the best of their ability, but they're leaving it, per my last conversation with them, I'm the radio system administrator, they're leaving it to the building owner's vendor, the integrator, to comply and certify. And once they get the certification letter, they're accepting it as it's good. So that's the argument and the difficulty I'm having with my HJ is you can't really kind of do that and expect this to work and then you're going to impact me as the administrator of the system. Now I got to go out and figure out what's going wrong when I'm starting to get complaints.
So in DC, we're actually kind of blessed in that the fire marshal for the city/state, because we're kind of both, basically said, oh, that's radio, I don't want to deal with that. And wholesale handed the problem over to the agency that runs the radio system. So ours standards are developed out of the radio system with the advice and consent of the fire marshal, who's technically the AHJ. So we function as an extension of them. That's not a fireman's expertise. His expertise is how to prevent and how to put out fires. And I think that's something that the industry's gonna have to wrestle with. Do you put the person whose job it is to put out a fire in charge of figuring out modulation schemes, or do you find an expert in that subject and have an expert do that material? And that sounds like one of the struggles.
That's an interesting point, and I'm the AHJ for the radio side in the Portland Metropolitan Area for the Multnomah County system, city Portland system. But I work with the fire marshal's office, and we go out together, do an inspection together. He takes care of the code issues, and we work with each other to determine, does this need to be, we discuss, for instance, fiber optic, does it need to be 2-hour rated or not? Is armor good enough with those ratings and so on? And work together. Basically, I look at the radio side of it, he looks at the fire code side of it. And that's worked out quite well, actually.
And one of the problems we're facing is that NFPA, IFC, they dumped this on the fire department.
Preach.
And the fire department was not prepared for this, but okay, everybody adopted it, and now they're stuck with it. So the fire department is the regulatory authority, but they're not radio guys, they're radio users. When it comes to survivability and stuff like that, yeah, of course, that's the stuff they do. And so I'm retired from Glendale now, but when I was with Glendale, I worked with the fire department, and they came to me as the radio guy. And all of your fire departments should be going to the radio guys and taking your guidance. But since retiring, I wrote a code for a whole bunch of cities in LA. It's basically the same document, tailored to the city a bit, which I'd be happy to share with anybody who's government guys. I'm more than happy to let you have a Word copy so you can cut and paste if it helps. But yeah, the fire guys don't have the bandwidth to deal with this. The radio guys have to step up and pitch in and make sure that whatever you provide to your contractors, building owners, that everything you're concerned about is included in there. Because saying it's in the fire code, it's your problem to the fire guys is well, it's setting up a disaster. It's why I spend a lot of time nowadays making money chasing BDAs that are in oscillation. It's this is part of the radio system. It has very little to do with anything fire related. And the people who use the system the most are not fire suppression folks. It's police and EMS. I mean, how many fire departments have more fire suppression calls than they have medical? I guarantee it's 0. And you don't want to be the guy on the ground with a paramedic who has to call for something and can't get through. And you sure as hell don't want to be a lone officer holding 2 people at gunpoint. He can't get through on the radio. So we need to move from, let the fire guy here be the regulatory authority, but we need to think about police, EMS, and the radio system as a whole.
I'd like to add to that. In my experience, what I see happening in throughout the jurisdictions is I'm beginning to see the radio communication people get more involved, such as what Lee's doing for years. But frankly, it's because in the past, a lot of times radio group people don't really want to deal with the fire marshal and the deputy fire marshal and so on and so forth. But because there is this growing problem of noise being generated on their networks, now they're wanting to get involved. And I can name a couple, 2 or 3 jurisdictions that are now reaching out to the radio group and getting them involved because they don't have a choice. The radio people are tired of chasing down these rogue BDAs that are oscillating, so on and so forth. So unfortunately, what's driving the problem is the problem that is being created, and in your jurisdiction, the radio people will likely get involved when they begin to see these problems become a real big problem, a bigger issue.
You got it.
So just a quick question, really. Brand with City of Portland, I actually work with that. But, so we're involved in the permitting process, but I was curious for some of the other jurisdictions up there. You're implementing a rebroadcast agreement and then trying to put teeth in that so that you do need to circle back with system implementers. You have some teeth to have them, or actually have the ability to shut down a pending system. So I just was wondering if anybody could speak to that fact.
So the DC code, we have a design review process. We have an inspection process that has been handed off to third-party, certified by the city, third-party inspectors. There is a local and remote shutdown requirement. Local is that there be a physical button in the fire control center that can turn off the system. And it has to be in the fire control center, not in the third electrical room on the fourth floor behind 57 boxes in the fire control room, a push button. As well as remote access is actually written into our ordinances that we'd be able to get to it over the internet to shut it down. And we've run into multiple cases where one system starts interfering with us, we don't know which one it is, and doing directional location when you have 7 rebroadcasters within a block of that gets extremely complicated. So the real answer is shut them all down, turn on one by one until the noise pops up and say, now I've got where it is. I can do that over the course, if it's remote, over a half hour, rather than a week, where we might have service impacts. We do a yearly rebroadcast requirement, where they have to have a yearly sign off from the agency that they're still permitted to broadcast under our license. And that comes with yearly testing of uplink as well as downlink. It's a much abbreviated version of the preliminary original testing, but there is a yearly testing requirement tied to that.
That also notification, what do you use for the remote shutdown?
So the
cellular or the radio system?
It's intentionally left vague. Honestly, we want to let the industry figure out how that should work. We don't look at it as a emergency shutdown in the oh my god the building's on fire shutdown sense. We look at it as emergency as in there's a interference problem happening on the network. This is during normal operating procedures. There's no reason the cellular network would be compromised. If the cellular network is compromised, that's what that button on the front door is for.
Do you have any notification process for shutting those BDAs down in those 7 sites that may be affecting that?
So in our case, we notify the fire department and the police departments of it. There's not actually much detail on how to notify the building owners.
It was the public safety side that you're turning something off that they would use normally.
Yeah, so there is, it usually is tied into the original notification of, there's an interference event happening in this location with decreased communications. Systems in that area will be going down as we fix it.
And trust me, everybody knows that they're having interference.
Go ahead, back.
I have a client who's unusual. They're an AHJ, they're building a building, they own the building. So, they want commercial DAS, and they want public safety DAS, and then they told us, I asked the question, FirstNet, how do you have FirstNet? And they said, oh, we're not doing FirstNet, because I thought, well, gosh, band 14, we can put it on a certain system that we know about. So, instead they said last week, we're gonna put it on Verizon. So now how do I handle public safety on a converged commercial system, where now we're telling them, if you do that, first of all, now I gotta provide all my public safety coverage, but how do I handle the code conflict? And number 2, yesterday, in fact, this morning, I got a phone call saying, oh, by the way, we like an operations channel, which is not public safety, but on the public safety DAS. And I'm thinking, well, we can do it, but it's in conflict with the code, and NFPA 72.
So, I'm gonna address the last one first.
Sure.
my understanding of the code is it's for the public safety use. If the AHJ decides that an operations channel is for public safety use, that is the answer to that question.
For an airline.
So for a private?
Yes.
But I mean, that's if the AHJ decides that's, so if they own the building, they can decide to put in a system that supports that. There's no reason that you can't have a commercial DAS system in a building that has a public safety DAS. Now, if they want to put those on the same hardware, that's potential. There's nothing in the fire code that prevents that. We have a local code that prevents that, but that's not in NFPA.
But do I not put 2-hour everything in for the commercial side too?
Depends on the AHJ.
They don't know what they require. It's a huge AHJ, huge. They don't know.
It depends on the AHJ. It really is. It's
And we wrestle with these requirements.
yeah.
It sounds to me like they are the committee and they're making the decision for you, right?
No, well, they don't know what to decide on, and they get different answers every week.
You want tap dancing, ask FirstNet how to put FirstNet in buildings for public safety.
I asked them for a year now, and that's no answer.
They literally change the answer every time we ask.
Yes.
You mean the Department of Commerce or ATT?
Yes.
Yes.
So the short answer is you put all of AT&T's bands in, including DAG Class 14.
Yep, that's the short answer right there, and that's exactly right. Everything that AT&T has in the market. I have a question that came from an NFPA board member, 1221 member, and it said, BDA, so I'm gonna bring this up since they're not here. BDA or DAS systems are complex, expensive, and prone to problems just by their nature. There are other potential solutions available to public safety that are not fixed in the building, such as mobile RTs or mobile repeaters, etc., or passive antennas, which a repeater or base station could be attached to in the lobby. I guess kind of somewhat like New York's doing. They wanted to know what are the pros and cons of those and what the thought processes are.
I got feelings. Go ahead.
But, I mean, you guys got any?
So, you want to start?
Yeah, go.
So, there's kind of a few that I've heard of. What New York City does is they put a full repeater system in a building. When the firemen show up, they flip the switch, turn it on, operate on that channel, turn it off when they're done. Works great. No interference problems, great coverage in the building, reliable, relatively cheap. Totally abandons all of the EMS and police. And that would be the big caveat there. Hoboken, New Jersey, I believe? I might have one of the towns in that area. Actually does something very similar. They put a full copper DAS into the building and they show up with a box of radios, wire it in, and go. Same exact problem of you're not solving what happens to the police officer dealing with a domestic dispute in the building, or what happens to an EMS call. How do you handle that? The huge advantage of BDA systems is you can make them work for everyone at all times. There's some cities that are doing shut the system down until someone walks into the building. I can see some application there. Can you get every officer who's running into a building with an active shooter to remember that they have to open the panel, get into the fire control room, flip the key, etc. That's kind of a decision.
Well, and when you consider police calls, they sometimes will go into the lobby, but usually they'll go right to wherever the problem is. So they don't have a place where they always go, like the fire command center, and to switch something on. The cops get there and they pull out their guns and they go and find the bad guy. And so, yeah, that unfortunately just doesn't work for the police. And they, like I said, they need it a lot more than fire suppression folks do.
Well, we have a neighboring fire jurisdiction that's opted to go with a vehicular repeater and use the vehicular repeater solution. So the fire, they equipped all their fire
we actually staff vehicle repeaters well on all of our frontline apparatus, not on ambulances. That would be a lot. They don't work below ground.
No, they don't penetrate into buildings very well either.
So if it's a LEED certified building, which is usually why we're putting in all of these systems, they don't get in great. Our testing has basically shown, so with old analog repeater systems, you could do sloppy cast, put 4 trucks around the building. The current digital systems don't support that. So you only get whichever one happened to turn on first. One of the faces of the building gets good coverage, the other 4, not so much. But we've done testing underground with them, and we can get down about a floor. We have most federal buildings in the district are 4 floors underneath of parking, which also is where they have their boilers, generator rooms, and utilities, and cars that are perfectly maintained at all times.
Okay, I have one other one that came from outside. What makes a good design submittal? If you're an AHJ, what do you want to see?
Well, what I want to see is basically the one-line design of the system, usually the heat maps, and pretty much that's what I'm looking at, what's being submitted to me. Type of equipment, specs on, we require specs on all of the passive components, cable, etc.
Now, do you require an uplink assessment?
And I was just going to say, I'm very concerned with the uplink link budget and the noise for the uplink, and whether or not the amplifier is going to continue generating noise when there's nobody in the building using it.
And you're on UHS.
Yes.
Yeah. We're on 700, 800 systems, so I'd like to see more link. I'd like to see more conclusive link budgets and so on, but so far I haven't started enforcing or requiring that.
Yeah, in our happy world, we could have uplink to downlink separations as little as 400 kilohertz.
That's right.
I'm the review authority. We're seeing 40 to 60 designs a year-ish at this point. The city's been growing and that's going up. I did the projection and potentially I've got something like 280 man days of review time a year. So anything that makes my review process go faster is what I'm looking for. And honestly, that's have you read through our requirements document and answered each of the questions in the order that they were asked makes it faster for me to go through and review it. So we require uplink designs, we require one-line drawings, we require coverage maps, we require equipment lists. And when I have to send it back to the integrator 3 times saying, you still haven't provided me what batteries you're going to use for this system, that's 3 times I have to go, okay, what was this system, what was wrong with it, go through my list. So anything that expedites that and makes me confident that you've done the uplink budget. If the uplink budget works on a 700-800 system, the downlink will work fine.
Exactly.
Honestly, if you're putting in a commercial DAS and a public safety DAS, we allow sharing of copper. You should have you can do that and have the same antenna density. Your uplink's going to work. I want to be confident it's not going to cause me to have to get called out in the middle of the weekend to go find out where the interference is. That's really what I'm looking for.
Amen, brother.
And the rain.
Can you speak to the hardening of systems with mobility versus land mobile or public safety in common use of DAS? How do you guys feel about that?
I have no problem with it.
Yeah, I don't have any issue with it. It just depends what part they want to combine, but say it's a fiber DAS and they want to use it for public safety and carrier. Generally, I don't have a problem with it. Just depends on the jurisdiction. Sometimes the city won't want it that way, but overall, it's generally no issue with it.
I want to just bring something up as a manufacturer of fiber DAS. When you look at a fiber DAS, a properly built fiber DAS, you're not sharing the same amplifiers between carrier and public safety. they are on their own separate amplifiers. And if you look at the architecture that we bring to the market, you can separate that. You can actually have your public safety electronics back up for 24 hours in your carrier or not. The bottom line is that there's this perception out there that a lot of these DAS systems, and there may be some out there that are this way, that they're sharing one amplifier. That's not, if that happens, it can be, especially on the uplink, very disastrous. So you do need to look at what type of system is going
Well,
in.
yeah, you can't share amplifiers because you've got a part 90 versus a part 22.
Yes, but there are DAS out there that do that.
I can't do that.
Well, okay. I know they can't do that. So anyway, but you're right, and you should never mix power control versus non-power controlled mobiles or UEs on the same LNA period. It's not good practice. Yeah.
So basically, the AHJ is the one that says whether they enforce the code, or they do not, or they enforce part of the code.
Now, keep in mind, an AHJ may or may not have a mechanism with which to enforce a state law, if it is a state law. If your state hasn't adopted it, then don't worry about it. But if say in California, it's state law. If the AHJ has no enforcement mechanism, you as a building owner still have an obligation to comply with state law. So if it's in the building code, you have to do it. It doesn't matter if there's an enforcement mechanism. Of course, by the same token, the licensee still has to give you express permission to put in a PDA. So you get to be in a very complicated position. But it's incumbent upon a building owner to comply with state law.
I'm a gas integrator, and you know, some jurisdictions require conduit, some others don't require conduit. Some they do 2-hour rating if they're off a sprinkler system. Verticals need to be 2 hours. You know, everybody does what they want, basically.
Oh yeah, and we see that one inspector will have an opinion different than another inspector on how it should be done. But yeah, in a state, it's the state law. The cities or counties may have their own code that adopts what state law said. They can always make it more restrictive.
Yeah.
They just can't be more permissive. And state law can be more restrictive than FCC rules, but they can't be, well, when it comes to the technical specifications, they can't. But interference, noise floor, that kind of thing. But state law can adopt what the FCC rules say and be more restrictive, and then the cities can adopt what the state has and be more restrictive. But they did this, none of them down the line, starting at the FCC, none down below that could be more permissive.
So what level of the law prevails? That's what I'm not understanding.
Ultimately, Title 47.
FCC.
Yeah, that's the ultimate authority. If the FCC tomorrow said, there's too much noise, we're discontinuing use of BDAs. Okay, they all go away. We don't care what any state says. You're done.
Okay, is there anyone speaking to Class A versus Class A, Class B boosters?
Probably.
It depends on the noise floor as far as we're concerned. Yeah.
We prefer Class A and have that in our free ride pass agreement.
Yeah, I agree with Class A is preferred. Of course, you have a higher propagation delay through a Class A, so if you're running a digital system, you need to have sufficient signal in the building from the BDA to overcome what's coming in from the radio system, because you only got a 15 microsecond propagation delay maximum. Otherwise, you're out of phase. But in which Class B doesn't have that issue. But I prefer a Class A.
We require a Class A. Actually, in my experience, I haven't really seen much problems with the propagation delay, mostly because this is going to new buildings. They're all trying to meet LEED certification, which means they're building in a Faraday cage, and I'm on a 7800 system. So I don't see the time delay. I also haven't honestly seen, of the, 60 or so I've inspected in the last 2 years, one of them had an oscillation problem, and they decided to put like the donor antenna and one of the coverage antennas on the same pipe one above and one below the roof line.
When that happens.
Honestly, it was easily fixable at inspection. But, so the more the issue we have with Class 8Bs is you have, in our case, I think like 4 different A7800 megahertz systems operating in the district. And you potentially have subscribers running around that are operating on the public service system, like public safety, electric and gas, like that system. You have others operating on the train system. They have, I believe, a 7800 system, more than one train system. So if those portables happen to be in the area and keyed up, you're using some of your link budget for, and your amplifier and your LNAs for those in a Class B system, you're rebroadcasting them. On the downlink, if all of those things light up in the city when something busy happens, you've just got 2x, 3 times the amount of power coming in on the downlink to your Class B. We're all the frequencies are interspersed. We're also in the Northeast, where the next jurisdiction over is a total of like 10 miles, maybe 5, in our case 5 miles. The next jurisdiction over provides backup radio coverage to us in the case of a full system failure by doing absolutely nothing, just leaving their system as is, because we're just physically that close together. So in that case, everything lights up. You all of a sudden have an extra 40 signals in on Class B. So that's the part that worries us, is how is that link budget handling? Does it have the power to do that? And that Class A helps filter that out.
What I'm hearing though is the issue of filtering versus filtering assumed because it's Class A.
Well,
And in fact, you'd be filtering on both.
Well, filtering is critical regardless of what you put in. In LA area, we're all T-band and systems all overlap one another. And so it's really nice to see a Class A put in. Even with Class A's, you're still putting in notch filters because you have such tight separation. We also have regulations that say, thou shalt not turn on this BDA except into a non-radiating load until inspection. When I turn them on for inspection, I honestly find about 1 in 5 oscillating. And that's after they think they commissioned them. So most of the time I go in to inspect the BDA, I have to recommission the system. Most installers really, God bless all of them, I hope none of them are in this room that I've dealt with, but I've had to redesign their systems and recommission BDAs, and especially alarm companies. And, but we have such tight tolerances. One of the nice things about a Class A is that when it goes into oscillation, you can look at a spectrum analyzer and know, oh, that's a Class A BDA, because I see all my channels there.
It's my Class A BDA, not the neighbor's.
That's right. Otherwise, we just had a BDA, an LA County BDA, that was a Class B, that was wiping out Glendale. Well, a good chunk of our channels, because we have 3 different UHF bands. And we didn't know whose it was, because it's wiping out the entire band. But I'm just having a conversation with Kevin here, that some of the BDAs, he's with Comm, in Glendale, we've got 400 kilohertz separation between the control channel downlink and the uplink on one of the voice channels on the truck system. And so we've gone back and retrofitted, Comm's expense, retrofitted notch filters in to notch out the downlink of the control channel on the uplink side. And now we've added more frequencies and it's going to be even tighter. Yeah, filtering is critical. And some jurisdictions say they don't want external filtering, and I think they're insane.
That's great.
Oh yeah, as long as you put the filter in an EMA4 enclosure so it's secure, but in UHF, you've got to have good filtering.
But it's internal, it's in the EMA4.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, but LA City considers it extra.
Go ahead.
Can we go back to the previous slide about areas of detention? You showed pictures of the fire route. what's the common consensus of, you know, the connecting the feeder to the riser? Does it have to be in a 2-hour rated room? Does it need to be wrapped? Does it, I mean, what are you guys seeing out there in the wild?
I usually see enclosures built around the risers.
How so?
Build like a 2-hour rated.
Build a 2-hour rated
room, basically?
Yeah, build a shaft. Well, the head end has to be the 2-hour rated room, or the rest of it is pointless. But yeah, they build a 2-hour shaft.
Brian, actually, you've seen a lot of this, so why don't you dive in here?
Yeah, well, I found the majority of everything, they try to get away from this 3M endothermic wrap, and they actually build an enclosure. It's a whole lot cheaper. Endothermic wrap, it can go like $150 a foot. It's insane.
We've seen it.
Compared to a chase where you're looking at $40 a foot for a 2-hour rated chase. So you can save a ton. And also you're going to run into a lot of problems at splitter locations, tenor locations. How are you going to wrap a box with the splitter in it, and how are you going to have access to that box to switch out the splitter?
Yeah. All right, remember, you have to have some kind of maintenance access into that as well.
Our biggest problem, I'm with an MEP firm, and our biggest problem is during design of the building, you know, number one, you don't know you need a system until it's tested.
Yes.
And then, so you gotta convince the architects, the owners, and the general contractors to build, or to have in their head that they're gonna need some sort of a fire-rated room to put a system in that they may never need. So the question is, do you put it, you know, do you by default put in a 2-hour rated room to house these systems? And then how do you take care of the 2-hour fire rating going out to the antennas because your cabling will be 2-hour fire rated?
You absolutely have to have some kind of infrastructure in place or some game plan, especially if your building's big enough. If you have a basement, without an exception, you need to have something in place. You're going to fail radio testing.
Yep.
If you have a wood frame structure that's only 3 or 4 stories up, under 100,000 square feet, you're probably not going to need a system, especially in conjunction of where the local radio tower is at. But if you have a basement, you're using a type A1 building, it's concrete, you have a parking structure, you need to assume that you're going to need a system. You have to have an infrastructure in place.
We've also seen a couple of partial installs, and we permit this. You run the coax, nothing else, no antennas, no anything else, and then when they do the inspection, they do the testing. If it passes, you leave that stuff hanging and go from there. I don't think we've ever had one pass yet. So they've always ended up having to add the whole system. We require like at least a rough design and notification they're going to do that. Mostly people don't want to do it because by the time you get to the point where you can do that testing, you don't have much time before you wanted that C of O. So I mean, I would have a plan for how to, do you have hardware on the shelf? If you're going to go that approach, but I don't see a problem with that approach.
I see a lot of different interpretations with a lot of jurisdictions that I work with, and I'm sure Red Rock comes across the same. I think the key in new construction, as you alluded to, is we're educating the GCs, the architects. A lot of the projects that I do now with multiple GCs, they know automatically whether they're going to need a system or not. They're figuring out a 2-hour rated room. A lot of, now the code doesn't specifically state that the room has to be 2-hour rated, but the riser does, or the backbone. So most jurisdictions are smart enough to realize that, okay, that equipment needs to be 2-hour protected, because what's the point of the riser being 2-hour protected from a situation like that? Ironically, I believe that is a 2-hour rated room, but the jurisdiction didn't quite understand the distinction, so they enforced a 2-hour wrap inside of a 2-hour room. So it does get kind of crazy, but getting in on the design plan of the construction side of it is really key in being able to meet these requirements.
We design in high-rise buildings particularly, we'll put vertical risers in multiple stairways many times and try and keep the antenna, because stairways are 2-hour rated. Normally you're not allowed to put other wiring in the stairwells, but for this it's permitted. And we try and, as much as possible, keep the antennas inside those stairwells if we can light up floors. with multiple risers, or just have it just outside of the stairwell where we can go through the wall and then have a wall-mounted antenna on the other side without having to go with a horizontal run of cable that would require 2-hour fire rating. So it's the best, solution that we found is it's less expensive to go with multiple risers if you have a building where that works.
But you do have to, most jurisdictions, I have not had a problem with that, especially for existing buildings, but some jurisdictions don't want that stuff going in the stairwells, even though it is servicing the stairwell, which is the building code distinction and requirement. But I did also hear that, discussion of 2-hour rating, the horizontal feeder cable, which is a whole other discussion. The code does not require specifically that the horizontal feeder cable be 2-hour rated, or it specifically discusses the backbone of the system, which is considered the riser.
Well, it does consider all the horizontal cable to be 2-hour rated. That's part of survivability under NFPA.
No, it depends.
Survivability level 1.
Yeah, level 1
well, it's changed to level 1 now. It was level 2. I mean, but it was originally level 2 because they wanted 2-hour fire rated, and you couldn't certify anybody's cable to be 2-hour fire rated.
No, I think it's always been, the horizontals have always not rated.
Until there's 2-hour
In a
coax.
non-sprinkled building?
What's that?
In a non-sprinkled building? No sprinkler system in the
Well,
building?
the code specifically talks about horizontals not being rated. I think it's been that way since day one, hasn't it?
As long as they're sprinkled. Yeah, what about a non-sprinkled?
Well,
that's up to your jurisdiction.
Yeah, and that's an existing building, or is it a new building?
It could be new building.
Yeah, it's let's see, the California, NFPA, I think is silent on that.
no, NFPA actually defines it,
Oh,
especially in the newest
California
version that defines it.
And then it's up to the AHJ.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it would be up to the AHJ at that point, but the NFPA code has always said that the horizontals don't need to be protected. They need to be terminated in a 2-hour rated zone.
The horizontal that's part of rising has to be.
Yes, that's correct.
But as far as, and the connection has to be 2-hour rated. But once you have a feeder going out to feed service antennas, that doesn't unless the AHJ requires it.
That would be specifically AHJ.
If you follow the NFPA, though, it at minimum should be level 1 survivability, which is mechanical protection in this fully sprinklered environment.
Right. But California's state law is silent on that. It's up to the AHJs. So NFPA is just a guideline. And unless the state adopts it or an AHJ adopts it, it doesn't matter what NFPA says. So your state law, like California state law is silent on it. And then the local jurisdictions adopt it. And some of them are more restrictive than others.
Are you guys seeing like anything where you just like where you see discrepancies in reality versus the code, where you just talk to the AHJ and say, this is what you're enforcing isn't gonna work because of, and then they're like, oh yeah, that's cool.
Depends on the AHJ.
Yeah.
Some you can talk to, some you won't hear.
It depends. I've worked with AHJs that look at the situation, assess, and there's reason involved, and others where they're going, no, I don't care what it costs, you're going to do it.
My turn. So, one of the things that I always recommend to integrators that are maybe just getting into public safety is I tell them, first of all, make sure you have the current local ordinance. If you have a copy of the ordinance, it may not be the current one, so reach out to the AHJ and make sure you do. Secondly, even if you know in advance you have the current version of the ordinance, I suggest reach out to the AHJ anyway to make sure that what's on paper is what they're actually looking for today. Because someone mentioned, I think maybe Steve mentioned, that you can have jurisdictions where 2 inspectors who work in the same jurisdiction look for different things. We had a situation we ran into, not we, but our integrators, 8-10 months ago started in the city of LA, where integrator would go put in a system, everything was right. The fire marshal showed up and it was fine. The electrical inspector came in and failed it and said, oh, well, this unit is not in the NEMA enclosure.
Welcome to Los Angeles.
Yeah. We said, well, yes, it is in a NEMA enclosure. Our product ships in a NEMA enclosure. Well, but it's not the right NEMA enclosure. Well, it's NEMA 4, that's actually in our case 4X, that's as right as you can be. Long story short, someone decided that they required UL50E protection. That was never in the written ordinance. The fire marshal, the fire authority never talked about it. It was the electrical inspector. So all of a sudden we had these integrators who'd installed the system, done their tests, they were ready for the sign-off walk. Fire marshal shows up and says, yep, looks good, and the electrical inspector fails the building 2 days before the building owner's expecting to move in. You can imagine emotions and tensions flare up very quickly. And so only recently has the city of LA actually modified their ordinance to state UL50E. But they didn't, but they were failing it. So these integrators had to scramble to buy a UL50E cabinet, mount it on the wall, do all the punch outs so they can get the cabling in out, then take our BDA, which was in a NEMA 4X enclosure, and put it inside the UL50E cabinet to satisfy the electrical inspector. So again, my suggestion always is get the ordinance, make sure it's the right ordinance, the most current one, but in addition, reach out to AHJ and find out what really they're going to look for when they come for that final test one.
And what Don brought up is kind of interesting, because here you have the fire department, it's the regulatory authority for code. And they came up with a regulation, and then the electrical inspectors came in and they started inspecting and they started failing systems that the fire department had already signed off on. And so the fire department finally, about 1.5 years later, no, 2 years later, rewrote their regulation and said, contact the fire department after you get approval from LA City Building Department.
That's our approach.
We got a few more minutes here, let's go ahead. We've got a few more minutes, so go ahead.
So when you put your NEMA 4 BDA inside the enclosure, what do you do about the heat load?
Just give, they got 4 box.
Well, first, yeah, what we did, and again, we may have been the first BDA manufacturer that ran into this, I don't know. But the first thing we did was we got the specs on the UL50 cabinet, we got that to our R&D department, and said do some calculations and tell us right away if we think this will be a problem. They said no. Then we said okay. Then we actually got one of the UL50 cabinets from the vendor here in the U.S. and we shipped it overseas and said, okay, now put a unit inside, run it, put a signal in, put a load on it, and, make it run like it's a real operational, and see if there's a problem. And fortunately, there was not. Yeah. But if you think about it, it's a gross waste of money and a gross waste of precious wall space and gross waste of time. And I think perhaps there was some building owners in LA that, not through anyone's fault, were prevented from moving into their building on time, and that's very costly for a whole lot of people.
This brought up something that, look at the code for the jurisdiction you're at. We've had multiple designs submitted that very obviously were meeting a Virginia code. Turns out DC is not Virginia. I'm not sure if the integrators do this.
It used to be.
That's pre-PDA. But look at the code, read through it. Like if an AHJ bothers to publish the document, it usually means because we actually have feelings about some of those things. They had a whole lot of extra stuff that the other jurisdiction wanted, and it was like, okay, it's nothing that's not allowed in our city, but you just spent a whole lot more money. The stuff that it required a separate fiber DAS system for a 25,000 square foot building. It's just stuff that was just not in our code. Also, I know in our case, if you want to have a half-hour meeting with us and ask what's going on before you install one, call us up. If we can prevent you from having to submit multiple times, and if we can get you to pass the first time, it's less of our time dealing with you, which is honestly our main goal.
Pre-application meetings are golden.
In Los Angeles County, you've got 88 cities, and some contract with County Fire, and County Fire has their own way to do things, and the city's police department isn't included in what County Fire gives you. And then the cities can come back and say, okay, you have to retrofit our frequencies back in when they realize what happened. You have 88 different ways to do things. And so, yeah, and make sure you get the right jurisdiction, because I see plans come through when I'm doing plan checks all the time. It'll have LA County Fire or LA City Fire frequencies and regulations in them. And I'm going, this is San Gabriel, this has nothing, there's Beverly Hills, it has nothing to do with LA City. So, yeah, make sure you have the regulation for the right agency.
It inspires a lot of confidence when it's someone else's design or someone else's city's rules that you're following.
And as an integrator, one of the biggest challenges we have is jurisdictions that don't have any enforcement document, because then they fall back on the NFPA and the fire code, but you don't know if you've done anything wrong until after you've installed it. So getting that dialogue, that communication with whoever is going to be responsible for signing off the system in a county application, a deputy fire marshal, whoever's going to be inspecting that, I get on the phone and I talk to those people to say, okay, what are you going to require as far as level of survivability for the horizontal feeder cable? Because I've had instances where in the same county they've allowed just the plenum free air in a sprinklered environment, but then on another project they said, oh no, we want level 1 survivability. So it is a moving target, and it is a task to keep up with what's required.
Yeah, a couple other comments I'd like to make. First of all, we've talked about it on calls. I think it's worth making a statement to sort of clarify things. You'll hear sometimes people refer to, well, the NFPA, I put in the system and it's in compliance, or I intend to make it compliant with the NFPA code or the IFC code. Really, NFPA and IFC should really be looked at as standards guidelines organizations. They publish guidelines for standards, guidelines for code, but it's the local jurisdiction who you really need to worry about. And we've seen ordinances where they basically took whatever they get out of NFPA and just pasted it onto their own letterhead. We've seen others where they take bits and pieces of NFPA and or IFC, but they add then their own local requirements as well. So it's the local code, the locally enforceable or enforced code that you really need to worry about. The other comment I want to make too is we actually started this presentation with mentioning that there's some very strong feelings amongst many of us veterans in the industry that the local ordinances, the local code, has got pages and pages and pages of 2-hour fire rated stuff and electrical stuff and conduit stuff, and not enough about the RF side. And as Greg mentioned in his slide, and by the way, I've spent a few years with OEMs, but I spent collectively about 7 years before that working for a couple of DAS integrators that did public safety systems. The first one was where I met and worked with these two guys. In those days, the ordinance spoke largely to the RF side of things. And with rare exception, Washington, D.C. being one, city of Glendale when Mr. Ronick was there, they've now switched. It's all talk about 2-hour fire rated soffits and 2-hour fire rated rooms and this and that. And very scant and nebulous if anything at all is ever about the RF side. So, I mean, most of us on this panel are members of Safer Buildings Coalition, and we actually had a meeting with them yesterday and said, you know, you do all these great events, and you talk about to our fire rated office and to our fire rated rooms and things, but someone needs to help educate the AHJs, because as someone else on this panel mentioned, the AHJ guys, they're fire people. They understand fire prevention, and putting out a fire is unfortunately what happens. But oftentimes they don't have the RF expertise. Sometimes they have a radio shop that can be called on. Sometimes they don't even have that. So we've told SBC, we think as an industry, we need to help educate them so at least they understand the fundamentals and basics. Because if, you know, left on their own, two things are going to happen. They're going to gravitate towards the electrical side of things because that's more fire alarmish. That's what they're used to, is what they're comfortable with. Totally understandable. And at the same time, no one's really reached out to help them understand it. And at the end of the day, as you've heard many of us say up here this morning, the system is an extension, or should be, an extension of the public safety radio network. It's not a fire alarm. It's not a fire control system. It's not a fire prevention system. It's an extension of the public safety radio network. If you think about that, the first darn thing that should be looked at is the RF side of it, and everything else should be important, but not primary, should we say.
Also, I just wanted to point something out for folks that have not worked on public safety, or on the public side of it, not for cities. Often when we talk about talking to the radio people from the city, often those people are very much dedicated to subscriber management and have little involvement in the infrastructure creation. So it's kind of like if you went to the local Verizon store and started asking them, so where are all your cell towers, what tower are they transmitting at, and what frequency are they on? None of the people in that office have a clue of those answers. They know how to turn the phone on, how to activate it, how to do the SIM card, all of that type of stuff.
Oh, by the way, you're ready for an upgrade. You see the new Samsung?
So that's also a conversation to have with the AHJs of, you kind of want to be involved with the infrastructure people who can tell you where the sites are, can tell you where the voters are, and that type of stuff. Whereas in some places they're the same people, but some places they're not. And it's useful to just keep that in mind of, are you actually talking to the people that you want to talk to?
But according to the fire code, they're supposed to be publishing that information.
Yep.
Can I just ask a question that really is bothersome being an RF guy most of my life? If that doesn't work, firstly, the rest of it is a moot point. And I don't see enough of a focus on the RF side. And it really bothers me seeing that. It's fire, this, blah, blah, blah. If there's a fire in a business or a building, typically it's pretty destructive, disastrous. I mean, it's terrible. And a lot of that stuff is going to get burned up, and we're sad about that. But at least getting something working, getting the coverage in, that should be the focus. The other thing about Class A versus Class B that bothers me is who's going to keep all the records on that? If you go to Washington Radio Reports, look at the database around the Bay Area of California, 11 counties. There's like 3,800 line items at 700 and 800 megahertz frequencies. I gotta think those frequencies get changed. As soon as you go to Class A, people, that's your channels. Guy rides in from Richmond County or wherever. If that channel isn't in the radio or the BDA, you're SOL if it isn't a broadband device within the mass base. Again, just thinking out loud, we're doing both, but it's really a struggle, and I see incremental, not orders of magnitude of cost increase, but there's differentials of cost increase in complexity when you go one versus the other. That's what I say.
So, I get that. We're on the 7,800. Honestly, I don't know. Licenses do change, definitely. And if a city changes some of their frequencies, going around and reprogramming everything, or buying new filters or retuning filters is definitely a huge undertaking. But that said, if someone comes in from 2 towns over, they're likely swapping to the local system or having that conversation with the local system. And that actually is something that we've had discussions on in our area of, we have a lot of federal partners in DC. Like there's 35 different police forces within a 4 square mile area. high school, whatever we are, interoperability is a constant struggle. But if you, so you can go Class B, and I mean that potentially opens everything up, but it also doesn't solve the link budget problems. It doesn't necessarily solve the power sharing problems. And when they come into that jurisdiction, typically they are switching over to that system, at least in our area, not trying to talk back to their system that's 50 miles away, where you struggle to make, you would struggle to make the link budget work to not overload our system locally. I've got a BDA system that's installed 400 feet from my cell tower, or from my service tower. The link budget between the donor antenna and our receivers was 60 dBm of path loss, which when you do out the math is like nothing. We typically, on those type of sites, are throwing 20 to 30 dB pads on the donor side, to basically, because everyone built a 90. All the manufacturers build a 90 dB gain.
It's like horsepower in cars. The bigger the better. If I got 707 horsepower in my Dodge Daytona, I'm gonna whip your butt.
With the CB radio, the man with the most power wins.
Yeah, is it? Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. The industry would have, it would be a lot easier if there were some good 70 or 60 dB gain options.
Excellent.
But if, okay, you're gonna do that, so you're gonna make it so that it's not gonna overload my site when it's 400 feet away. You're not gonna reach the next town over without separate antennas, separate paths.
It still comes down to proper optimization of the
Exactly.
EDA.
And a proper design from the get-go.
Exactly.
If you do it
well,
right,
design and
it
then
works
proper
out good.
commissioning, right?
And all these other things I hear are these layers on layers of stuff to obviate potential problems, be it oscillation, power control, all these things. And if the friggin' thing was designed right from the get-go, it would work. And that's what I'm hearing. We're adding a lot of complexity where we don't have.
And to your point about Class A versus Class B, that was one of the things that I kept reiterating with some of the jurisdictions that were saying Class A only. I said, well, now you realize that as soon as you add new frequencies, you're going to have to make sure that the integrator goes back in these buildings and updates the BDAs accordingly.
Right.
And we had one situation as well where when the Super Bowl happened in Santa Clara, we got this wide notice that we needed to put all 24 channels of the network in each one of these BDAs in the city of Sunnyvale.
To be covered.
Well, but it got worse than that because the other 12 was central cell, which wasn't even being broadcast in Sunnyvale or Santa Clara. So you can imagine what would happen. We have all, by their requirement, we were putting in all 24. Now you go in to do a radio test. The radio is programmed to see the central cell and west cell frequencies, and they're keying up and they're not getting out. They're keying up, they're getting out because it's not able to talk to the other 12 that were updated in that BDA. So there's definitely challenges that come along with Class A, but one of the mechanisms that is working is, I just recently got a report from a customer that is saying, you know, hey, we got our annual inspection, and it was one of the first systems we'd put in like 5 years ago in Santa Clara County, where they only had 6. So we were missing, it's been missing the other, there's 12 frequencies that are required right now. So the third-party inspector caught it and said, hey, you need to update this BDA to include the additional 6 frequencies. So in this case, the mechanism is working with the annual testing.
Good idea.
So regarding the Class A issue, we happen to be working with a county that has several hundred BDAs installed throughout their county. Public safety 800 megahertz systems. They're redesigning their LMR network, so they're going to be reshuffling all the frequencies. So we've got on the order that they have, on the order of several hundred, most of them channelized, most of them Class A, that have to be touched once they do their reconfigure.
Orange County recently just revamped their whole system.
I'm sorry?
Orange County, California, just revamped their whole 800 megahertz system. And most of the BDAs there are 800, are Class B, but a lot of the older BDAs that were installed, we had to go to each one of these BDAs and change the filter out.
Yeah, as I've done annual inspections in Orange County, as soon as you go to them and find, oh, it hasn't been rebanded, you just reband it and include it in your documentation.
Yeah, I've been involved in a number
And
of
re-register.
projects. It's similar, although not quite the same, same issue.
I got a question regarding trains.
You get our past time, so if you guys need to leave, if these guys want to stay up here, it's fine, I guess, until the next group comes in. Okay.
So this just became a 3-hour session.
Sorry about that. So, anyway, my question is about trends. A couple of them come to mind. One is retroactive, or the application of ordinances to existing buildings. Are you seeing that movement in that direction?
I think the way our stuff is written is on renovation, they would get hit on that.
I think the local AHJ has some discretion in that. In the state of New York or the state of New Jersey, for instance, the state building code incorporates IFC 510. It's required in every new building. But if there is a requirement for retrofitting, that would be the local AHJ that would specify when, whether it's a major renovation, it requires a fire alarm system and other things in the building, then they would be required under the state code. If they just strictly adopt that, then there's no requirement for existing buildings.
Okay, thank you.
I do have some writing to be, so can't go on forever, right?
Any other questions, anything you think are?
I do have one. Fighting, how do you deal with the internal fighting of the AHJs, where you have the building department, the fire department, and you all got them saying different things? What's the best way to handle that?
Don't come to Los
In Oregon it actually went to the Supreme Court. In Oregon it actually went to the Supreme Court, the dispute between fire and the state building.
Yeah, you're in a no-win position. And I, even just doing inspections, I've got a jurisdiction in my area that I just won't do inspections there. Because the police department disagrees with what the fire department wants, and they disagree with what my old peers, the communications department wants. So I just stay out. And I know a lot of integrators that have decided they don't want to do business there.
That's it.
Any more questions?